Stanley Kubrick is one of the most influential directors of all time, with a visual style that both reveres and breaks the rules of the medium. This creates the perfect backdrop for the director's exploration of masculinity, with many of the male protagonists in his films dealing with a crisis of identity, whether threatened by external forces such as artificial intelligence in A Space Odyssey or war in Full Metal Jacket, or internal forces such as addiction in The Shining or relationships in Eyes Wide Shut. However, Kubrick's filmography is dotted with implied moments of queerness that momentarily break through this illusion of tradition and heteronormativity.
Where the rainbow ends.
Whether it's this iconic yet disturbing moment from The Shining, Sergeant Hartman's provocative questions in Full Metal Jacket, or the many phallic references in A Clockwork Orange. This is most prominent in his 1975 film Barry Lyndon, a period film about the rise and fall of one man in pursuit of the perfect image, and what might just be Kubrick's most queer film. Whether it's the men in the lake who confess their love for each other while Barry escapes from the British Army,
it's times like this that I realize how much I care for you.
Lord Ludd's languid yet sensual way of talking,
Maintenant, je suis fatigué.
Barry's kiss with Captain Grogan, or his relationship with the Chevalier, Barry Lyndon is full of references to queer characters and relationships. Although the film has built up a huge fan base, upon its release, it immediately divided audiences, with Pauline Kael famously describing it as a coffee table movie that took itself too seriously. Kubrick himself said in an interview that he thought it was divisive because, unlike his other films, it didn't explore topical issues. However, in the creation of what he intended to be his most observational and apolitical piece of work, he made what I think is his most politically and emotionally charged film, a perhaps unintended, masterful study of queer assimilation and image that acts as a cautionary tale of one man's slow disintegration as he sacrifices his queer identity for the sake of his public image. This is most evident in the film's visual style, and in particular, its likeness to a painting. The phrase, "every frame is a painting," has been used to describe Barry Lyndon, with Kubrick himself later revealing that each frame was made to resemble a real piece of work by the 18th century English artist William Hogarth. The film has the same stillness as a painting, with characters walking slowly from room to room, at a distance designed to heighten the observational feeling we get as viewers, as if we are strolling through an art gallery. This becomes more prominent towards the end of the film, as Barry becomes increasingly lifeless as he succumbs to a life that doesn't fit him. The film's growing resemblance to a painting reflects Barry's social assimilation and his mounting sense of loneliness as he represses his queer identity. As he achieves power and status through his accruement of conventional heteronormative ideals, Barry's life becomes like a silent painting, one devoid of feeling, movement, or life. Everything becomes an imitation, his emotional emptiness and lack of fulfillment reflected in the motionless frames, becoming a performance as he sacrifices his authenticity for the perfect image. This can be explored through three particular moments in three of Barry's relationships: his first meeting with the Chevalier, his first kiss with Lady Lyndon, and the fight with his stepson. In the first half of the film, before his marriage to Lady Lyndon, Barry is at his freest and most authentic, living his life without conforming to what's expected of him. Here we can see his carefree attitude and lack of responsibility reflected in the expressiveness and fluidity of the cinematography, with handheld camera work and frequent close-ups. This is also highlighted through the humour, which can only be described as camp.
Can I have a new beaker? This one is full of grease.
Conveying the absurdity of each situation with irony and playful indifference. This comes to the foreground when Barry begins living with the Chevalier, who is heavily implied to be gay, giving their relationship a clear queer undertone. Barry's first encounter with the Chevalier is very telling. Barry arrives at his stately home knowing that his job is to betray the Chevalier's trust by spying on him, but as soon as he meets him, he breaks down in tears and hugs him. They share an extremely tender and intimate moment as they embrace without saying a single word. The narrator explains that Barry is overcome with emotion due to being reminded of Ireland, but I would argue differently.
The Chevalier was as much affected as Barry at thus finding one of his countrymen.
Barry is moved by meeting another queer person and seeing this unexpressed part of himself reflected in someone else. For the first time, he is able to see who he truly is by meeting another person who is open about his sexual identity, with the other characters preemptively warning Barry about how the Chevalier is a libertine. While Barry lives with the Chevalier, we quickly see a closeness develop between them, and Barry appears most happy and fulfilled during this time. He has an immediate emotional connection with the Chevalier that he doesn't have with anyone else. The freedom of expression and authenticity that Barry feels within their relationship is reflected in the cinematography, with a vibrant colour palette and playfulness to the camera movement that feels free and unrestrained. Yet while this lack of stillness reflects the joy of living authentically, it also speaks to a danger that threatens to destroy Barry, the image of convention and tradition. In Barry's pursuit of this image, he meets and quickly marries Lady Lyndon, which leads to a notable shift in the film's visual style. When Barry first locks eyes with Lady Lyndon, there is a perceived immediacy to their connection, with the two of them staring at each other, almost frozen, not saying a word to each other before they kiss. Some people interpret this as an instantaneous attraction with a restraint of desire, a chemistry so strong that nothing needs to be said. However, Kubrick himself said that the connection between them was empty. It was all conveyed through silence, which dramatically made more sense, but also shows the fragility of their connection. For me, the silence and stillness of Barry's connection with Lady Lyndon reveals the superficiality and emptiness of their relationship, an imitation of attraction and closeness, and the beginning of his eventual demise. Having achieved a heteronormative ideal by marrying Lady Lyndon, Barry quickly begins to spiral. Their relationship mostly consists of them staring at each other in complete silence, his life becoming a meaningless copy of the one expected of him. The camera becomes increasingly distant and detached from the characters, with a darker and more subdued colour palette as we see the life slowly draining from Barry as he assimilates and isolates. Because he can't reconcile with his sexuality, he takes drastic measures to assert what is perceived as normal through classic signifiers of masculinity, becoming obsessed by the perfect image and acquisition of beauty, whether through buying things for the home that they can't afford or having not-so-secret affairs with other women. Appearance becomes everything to Barry, because it is better to look the part than to have a torn image, an image that later on is destroyed through his relationship with his stepson, Lord Bullingdon. Bullingdon is the only person who is able to see Barry for who he really is, someone who distrusts him and sees through his facade. Barry hates and openly bullies him for this, and his fear of being doubted and seen for who he truly is causes him to lose control around him, becoming reckless and aggressive as he forgets to conform to his own image of the loving husband and father, disturbing his reputation and the painting-like stillness in perhaps the most visually confrontational scene of the entire film. The tension between the two of them comes to a head during the infamous concert scene, culminating in this moment of completely feral violence, with Barry physically unleashing his insecurities over his image being threatened, which he ultimately ruins for himself as he wildly attacks his stepson, with the camera frantically rolling around with him on the floor. After clinging so tightly to this image, something has to give, and this is the snap. Barry's life soon fades into nothingness, as everything he ever cared about is slowly taken from him. Barry accepts obsolescence in the knowledge that he has been seen for who he truly is, never reaching the image that would satisfy him or convince him of his place in this world, a world that he was never a part of to begin with, desperately trying to belong. There have been many interpretations of Barry Lyndon over the years, yet few people have recognised its power as a queer story. Ultimately, it is about something that is hidden in plain sight, about the lives of queer people that are erased from history, and one man's obsessive pursuit of the perfect image in order to hide his true self. Because when we look beneath the stillness and beauty of every frame, we can see another side to history, and that maybe Barry and the Chevalier weren't just roommates.